Hello, Year 11. We're going to move away from our question technique lessons now and return to the curriculum. This lesson is going to focus on the crisis year of 1923, when the Weimar government faces something called the Ruhr crisis and hyperinflation. And in this lesson, we're going to work out exactly what is inflation and what is hyperinflation, and then we're going to examine and study why the Germans have hyperinflation in 1923. Okay, very simply, inflation is an economic term. So it's used to describe rises in prices and the fall in the value of money. So if you live in a country that suffers from inflation, it is usually because there's a shortage of essential products. So things like petrol and food get more and more expensive. Or there is another reason. It can be because the government has printed too much money, or in really severe cases, it can be a combination of both these things. So in summary, inflation is an economic term and it's used to describe a country where there is a massive rise in the price of things. Okay, so what is hyperinflation? I mean, hyper as a term just loosely means insane or wild. So hyperinflation is when inflation just goes mad and spirals out of control. So hyperinflation is when prices rise and money quickly becomes worthless and things spin out of control. And this actually happened in Germany in 1923. If you look at the graph, it shows you that in 1921, one German mark, one German pound, would buy you a loaf of bread. But something happens to the German money. So by the middle of 1923, a loaf of bread in Germany, bizarrely, is worth 60,000 marks. And that's hyperinflation. And we see further evidence of that in the black and white chart. This shows the value of the German mark against the US dollar. And you can see at the end of the war in 1919, 4.2 German marks would get you $1. But by 1923, again, something insane, something crazy has happened to German money. And the German money has become almost worthless. In August 1923, you'd have to find 1 million marks to swap for $1. Clearly, the German currency has become worthless, and that process just accelerates until by the end of 1923, the German currency is quite literally worthless. It's not worth the paper it's printed on. So we're going to have to understand why that happens, and that's the next slide. Okay, so let's look at now why the Germans have hyperinflation by 1923. And there's actually long-term causes, short-term causes, and actually what we'll call an immediate cause. So the long-term causes. Now, if we look at this, the Germans already had inflation from shortages at the end of World War I. So inflation is already a problem in 1918. They had hoped to sort it out by winning the war and getting the losers, Britain and France, to pay their debts, but they lost. So inflation is an issue. And after 1918, inflation continues to be a problem because prices continue to rise, because there's still shortages in Germany. And these shortages continued because the British were actually blockading German ports throughout 1919. The British were doing this because they hoped to force Germany, obviously, into signing the Treaty of Versailles. And technically, until that treaty was signed, the British and the French were still at war with Germany. So we've got long-term problems in the German economy creating inflation because there's huge shortages of goods in Germany. So inflation is already a long-term problem in Germany. And then it gets worse. And the reason it gets worse is because under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the Germans lost 10% of their resources. They had to give away industry and land to other countries. So obviously they couldn't produce as much as they had before. So a Germany already with severe shortages and facing inflation has now lost more land, has lost more industry, has lost more population, and therefore isn't producing as much, and therefore there's more shortages, prices are going up, there's more inflation. And then it gets worse, because from 1921, when they had to pay the reparations every 6 months in goods such as coal, iron, steel and timber to Britain and France, prices in Germany rose even further because now there's more shortages in Germany. So the Germans, faced with this inflation problem, said they needed time to get on their feet and asked Britain, France for a break in paying reparations. And then we come to the immediate cause. So France and Belgium thought they were doing it on purpose to just avoid paying reparations. So therefore, when the Germans missed paying an instalment in January 1923, the Belgians and the French invaded the Ruhr to take the goods for themselves. Now the Ruhr is here, where I'm just moving the cursor. That was actually Germany's industrial heartland. That's where the majority of their industry was. That's where Germany made its money. And that's obviously why the French and the Belgium have gone in there. So what happened next was the German government told the workers of the Ruhr to just go on strike and not produce any more goods. Therefore, there'd be nothing for France and Belgium to take. And the German government said they would give them strike pay. But obviously the German government didn't have any money to do this. So in order to do this, they just printed money. And the more they printed, the less value it had. They created a vicious cycle. So as they gave more money to the German workers in the Ruhr, prices started to increase in Germany. So the German government just increased the wages of the workers in the Ruhr, printing more money. Prices rose again. So the German government repeated. And you got this cycle that kept going and going and going. So you got billions and billions and billions and billions of marks into circulation in Germany, and their currency was just destroyed. It lost all of its value. And that's the long, the short, and the immediate causes of hyperinflation in Germany. So, armed with this information and the information on page 6 of your booklet on Germany, you should be able to plan this essay. And it's explain why there was an economic crisis in Germany in 1923. And I've given you the starter sentences. They're in the white ink in the blue boxes. And you can see there are long-term causes, and you explain them using the first two boxes on page 6. There are short-term causes. You can explain those with boxes 3 and 4 on page 6. And then finally, there's an immediate cause. And obviously you can explain that with boxes 5 and 6 on page 6. So hopefully you'll be able to follow this plan and create a little essay that evaluates the long, the short term, and the immediate cause of the economic crisis in Germany. Good luck.